there are certain processes and ways of approaching business that are changing. Now, when I say changing, I don't mean that the old ones are becoming obsolete. Not at all. I do think that certain aspects of property investing are still essential and need to be there. But it's great. This is where the beauty comes. Is like, combining, let's say, you as an individual who's got 25 experience of picking the right asset, and then combining aspects of data to actually make a more appropriate decision.
Yeah. Welcome to Property Banter by Pinnacle Buyers Agents, powered by Analytics. Today we're diving into part one of a two-part series with Dr. Matt from Analytics. In this episode, we will cover how to find property hotspots and how to avoid risky investments, the role of data in making smart decisions, and why affordability is the key to long-term success. We're joined today by Matija, Dr. Matija, from Analytics.
Thank you. Call me Matt.
How's si?
Dobro, how are you, mate?
I'm very well, mate. I'm very well.
Finally. We're chatting every day. Might as well do it in front of the camera.
Always talking shit.
Yep.
We'll clean it up a little bit for today.
That's what the editing is for. Let's smash it. What are we talking about today?
Mate, let's talk about property hotspots and not spots. But before we get into that, give us, obviously I know a bit of the background, but for everyone out there listening, talk to us about your background and how'd you get into data? Well, how'd you start Hashtag? What's the story there? What's the journey?
Yeah, so I guess like everything else, it's just a collection of coincidences. Started researching about property or investing in property probably 15 years ago.
How the hell didn't I meet you 15 years ago?
A bit longer. What's funny? I started back then. Buyers agents used to have those, what's it called? They had those like events where, they would present, bring people on, invite people. They would do a few presents, like they would present a few things, but essentially it comes down to sign-ups, And I used to attend all of those events essentially just to learn, mostly, Yeah. And then everything I hear, I would actually just, I remember buying my investment property magazine or trying to find.
Always wanted that.
Yeah, trying to find information anywhere just to educate myself. I remember started, building my spreadsheets for cash flow, expenses, what's included, what's not. And I think it started at the time I was working as a tradie, I remember. I was working on site and I really disliked, the 7 to 3 back then. And also just, I'm averse to authority for some reason. I don't like authority.
I never picked that with you.
Yeah, but listen. The truth, the thing is though, I don't like authority. And now, of course, I'm making myself, putting myself in a position to scrutinize what is false authority, what is not. But I hate false authority, and every workplace is full of it, whether you're working on a site or somewhere else. And I don't know how it actually started, but I realized that investing in property might be the way towards me just, quitting the rat race, doing my own thing, sitting at home and letting the, portfolio essentially provide me with a lifestyle. Because essentially every event that I went to, that was the main pitch. The main pitch is, property is going to replace your cash flow. It's going to essentially do everything that you need to do. You can sit at home and do what you want to do, I was going to university at the time. I liked writing. So I said, okay, my property will get me there, but then I'll, just do my own writing and just enjoy. And as I was collecting data and finding out more information, a few things happened. So first, I realized that a lot of the events that I was going to first the sales events, and me being silly, I didn't know how the world functions back then, First the sales, and then second, the areas that the buyers agents or those organizations, if you want to call them, I don't know what to call them now, the areas they were pitching to me just didn't pass the smell test. Now, I didn't know why, but actually, again, it's a matter of it's a collection of circumstance. I still live in Southwest Sydney. Back then, about 15 years ago, Southwest Sydney was really being built and developed. And if you actually went on the council website, it would say Southwest and Northwest growth corridors, where government is investing a lot of money. And now we know the Western Sydney Airport as well, and that came in later and all of that. And to me, it seemed like, it would be a good opportunity, to buy something there, but none of the buyer's agents were actually talking about it. And those companies that I went to seminars on, they weren't talking about it. And I remember asking them, okay, what do you think about Southwest Growth Region? And it was like, no, we're not looking there. We don't think, it was just a standard spiel, you would get like, okay, I didn't listen to them and I bought a piece of land back then. Like it was 600 square meter block for 250. I remember. I think now it's 800 or 900 if you want to reduce it just to the block value. And that area has skyrocketed essentially. Then I realized, okay, what are these guys making decisions on, And when I said these guys, I refer specifically to those guys. I'm not sort of generalizing everyone, but I'm saying back at the time. So I wanted to construct something for myself. And that's when I started buying Your Investment Property magazine. And at the back, you would have the stats.
Of course.
You'd have the stats. But the issue with that is, the stats were single dimensional in the sense that it represented, let's say, a vacancy rate at that month, at a particular point in time. And I thought, okay, I need to understand how the market moves in order to be able to interpret and see what's going to happen next. And it's interesting, speaking to you, for example, for the last couple of months as well, I always perceived property investing through the research and data mindset. I mean, I'd never at that time focused on asset selection per se, because I wanted to get out of the way all of the research component and then build something relating to that and then sort of focus on the asset. But anyway, long story short, I met my co-founder, Alex, just by accident, chain of events. At that time, I was just working with spreadsheets. And then he sent me a book on big data, and I was reading how banks in UK, for example, use big data. And big data is like essentially large volumes of data. I mean, big data, the name says for itself. We need millions and millions of data points in order to, Google is a big data organization. Yeah. Everyone, Apple, Tesla, everything is big data, They just collect large amounts of data in order to be able to either offshoot new products or predict the environment or whatever it is, And he gave me a book on big data. First time I heard about that concept, and I realized that banks in UK back then used to use traffic light data and feed that information into their decisions, whether they want to lend to people living in the suburb or not. Yeah. Which is interesting to me. It wasn't about, I can't recall now whether the book said that was the pure decision-making process, but it was interesting they were making decisions on that and not on many other circumstances or aspects of an individual's life, financial circumstance, that I would have thought would be the primary decision-making aspect, So I said, well, Alex, why don't we do something like this? Why don't we do something like big data, predictions, all of that, And that's how we started. We started, building Hashtag slowly.
That was 5 years ago.
That was about, honestly, I don't even know when my birthday is, so I'm bad with dates.
It's gone so fast.
I'm bad with dates. I think it was about 6 years ago. Yeah. In the meantime, I transitioned off from working on site to working, so let's say when I started reading about was 15, 20 years ago about property, I was working on site. Then I transitioned, I went into construction, but I started working in the office. I started working for tier 2 and tier 3 builders and developers as an estimator. Ended up running a team of estimators. Again, mathematics, analytics, prediction, data, In the meantime, got my PhD in organizational behavior, or organizational psychology. And I was essentially collecting, both qualitative and quantitative data and analyzing that to produce some kind of an argument about a theory, a contribution. And the reason why I say all of this is like everything sort of led towards this aspect of me being able to produce a story out of a data set,
Narrative,
Yeah, narrative. So, Alex and I started 6 years ago, and slowly but surely, at the time there were some competitors already, but, we just play our own game, beat our own drums, try to improve the product. And ideal customer profile for us was us. We wanted to build it for ourselves to improve the decision-making, And then one thing led to another, just you're adding features, you're adding processes, you're adding all of this, and here we are, here we are today. Essentially long story, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. It's a great story. And I remember the way I would select areas based on value and my street knowledge and my experience. And it's just very, very different. And I wish something like Hashtag existed back in the day, because I think I sat on Sydney property and that old mistake of
buying a place to live in first as opposed to rent investing. Rent investing wasn't a thing. And then, and I stayed in Sydney for ages waiting for the next Sydney boom when I could have gone somewhere else. So if there was a hashtag back then, that would have been amazing. We all would have been so far ahead. So
you're right. I mean, the mindset of the industry is changing dramatically, and there are certain myths that are being busted. And I don't mean there are certain processes and ways of approaching business that are changing. Now, when I say changing, I don't mean that the old ones are becoming obsolete. Not at all. I do think that certain aspects of property investing are still essential and need to be there. But it's great, and this is where the beauty comes, is combining, let's say, you as an individual who's got 25 experience of picking the right asset, and then combining aspects of data to actually make a more appropriate decision. You know what I mean? It's essentially, in let's say, in my PhD or in academic circles, you'll call that triangulation. And what that essentially means is trying to approach a problem from many different angles in order to make sure that you're not missing anything, And that's what's
what we love about HTAG. We love that detail. That's not what we see it's built by property investors for property investors and buyers agents, right? And anyone looking to make the right decision and minimize any potential risk, because that comes back to what you were saying earlier, how you actually are not just constructing the narrative, but minimizing all and any points of risk.
Yeah, so coming back to, for example, that discussion about, those individuals who are pushing certain areas at a particular time. And as we all know in the industry currently, there are ethical and unethical actors.
That's the world of polarity, right?
Exactly. For some reason, actually it's in every industry, but for some reason in property it really stands out in a sense because there's a lot about property investing that's also related to marketing, independent of marketing, And sometimes marketing is equated with competence, which is not the case. So coming back to, what those areas they were promoting, and if you could actually just, assess those areas that they were promoting on the basis of particular property investment indicators or metrics, you would understand whether that's actually suitable for you or not, or whether they're telling the truth or not, even if you want to go and push it to that extent, trying to find out whether they're lying or not. And then coming back to what you're saying, it's exactly right. It's a tool that you use to make sense and to see, whether something is right for you or not. Now, the complexity increases in data and in everything else is when you're trying to find out what is the best possible thing or a scenario for your particular situation. And that can get very complex. But I mean, you can start and build up on that complexity as you go along. You don't have to deep dive into it right away. And there are certain 5 or 6 things that you can look at to really, I guess, see truth from false. If you wanna,
But I think a lot of people don't ask certain buyers agents or certain spruikers about, their strengths, weaknesses, why they're in a certain area, and so on. Because a lot of the bigger guys pump volume, and when they do volume and they've got contacts in a particular area, and a lot of people don't know this. When they've got volume, when they pump volume and they've got contacts in a certain area, they'll stay there, particularly because there'll be an agent that'll give them 10 deals a month. And they'll just take 10 deals at $15K and put 10 clients into that area. And that's $150,000. And they'll pump that area after, for example, when I would have left, let's say I would have left an area in January this year. They'd continue pumping it for the next 8 months. Why? Because they're making $150K a month at 10 deals times whatever. It's about their personal interest. And I think a lot of people don't see that side of the industry.
Yeah, so there's a lot of market making, if you want to call it that way. You know what I mean? The issue is that, what is not really understood properly is that you can't market make continuously and perpetually. No. Because sooner or later, you're going to create a friction point for the residents that live within that suburb. I mean, in order for you to market make, you need to have not only those, let's say, buyers agents pumping the area, you also need to have the residents also buying within that area. So you can have compounded growth or growth that exceeds the 10 or 15% average, not averages, but I mean, the hotspot average, if you want to call them. So somebody can be market making in area, but they represent a certain cohort of buyers. They don't represent the entire cohort of buyers.
No.
So if they continually try to market make and pump a particular suburb, they'll come to a friction point where the nosedive is going to be much more pronounced than would have been if.
And you don't want to be caught at that.
No, absolutely.
At that point, right?
Absolutely. Because, internal residents will start feeling the pain. And I always say this, you reduce it down to purchasing, groceries. You know what I mean? Remember, I came to Australia in the year 2000. I remember at the time we could purchase, I always say this, and this is what data is. You always need to reduce it down to representations of behavior. And try to refer back to yourself. You're a test case. You're an individual. You know what I mean? And then think about domains of life where affordability has really impacted the way you behave. As I said before, like you go to Coles and you fill 2 trolleys up with $50 in 2000s. Now you need $300 to fill one, and that has dramatically shifted how we perceive purchasing and how we perceive value. And imagine on a scale of property where you're spending $500, $600 or $1 million in a suburb where residents are completely feeling priced out of the market. How does that impact their lifestyle? So, for example, their mortgages increase, they can't buy property, that part of the demand completely drops or fades away or evaporates. And it just changes market dynamics of an area. You know what I mean? And then coming back, what you said at the onset is like, a lot of people don't ask the buyer's agent, so let's say don't ask the individuals who are investing on their behalf about, like an area or why, what, and how.
But they wouldn't know the business behind how buyer's agency runs. I think that's one of those things where they wouldn't know what the buyer's agent's doing. And some of them are greedy. Some of them are there pumping those areas because they have a business model that's really benefiting from that particular thing. It might not be a buyer's agent, it could be someone just from another sector of the industry that's literally pumping one particular
that has volume, that can generate volume.
Generate volume. So, and they manipulate markets, and you've got to be careful not to get caught out there.
So, see, this is what I don't know as well. I mean, it's a question for you, I guess. So let's say, I sort of see it through running hashtag. I see that, the analysis and research with some individuals, it's really non-existent there, and with others, it really, really matters up front. So if you have, I guess, potential to generate large volumes of purchases, inadvertently is what you're saying is that potentially you don't even need to do the research and the analysis.
No. They might not even know how to do the research and analysis.
Well, that's a side discussion,
But what they do is they have volume and they come in and they manipulate it. And odds are the person doing it would have bought first. Then his cohort / followers / whoever will come in, they'll buy it, and it could be a pump and dump. It's literally... it's a pump and dump on real estate, like what you'd sort of see in the stock market.
Yeah. And now that you say this, it really makes sense to me because I can see, for example, certain areas being promoted online, which to me don't make long-term. See, okay, now another thing
we see this all the time.
Another thing that needs to be mentioned is, I'm really against when people promote an area online, and they say area X is good to invest into. That inadvertently highlights to me how much they either don't know or they're just using clickbait consciously, Because whether an area, a good investment location for me is not a good investment location for you. Why? Because we've got different financial circumstances and different goals. Maybe my investment time frame is 3 years. Maybe your investment time frame is 15. So how can, by the way, we are all bound by, between 1,000 to 5,000 suburbs that are generating sufficient volume in Australia where we can actually invest into. So there are some boundaries there with crossovers. I do understand, but you have different investment time horizons. You have different desired returns at a particular point in time, so you can leverage into additional purchases. You have different risk profiles. You have different budgets. So how can an area that's being promoted online be suited for every single individual out there?
It's not.
You know what I mean? And then what I don't see is the explanation behind the area that's being promoted. So, for example, an area A is a good investment location, but there needs to follow an explanation where they would say it's a good investment location for this particular type of an individual. And you give a brief description of 4 or 5 points that match a particular customer profile to which this area is suited. You know what I mean? So this is coming back to, if somebody promotes a single area to everyone, they either don't know what they're doing and what they're talking about, or it is a clickbait program, where they just want to attract or be perceived as an individual that has a holy grail or a source of all the good information that everyone comes. And this is why, for example, some of the areas that are being promoted online, and let's say that have generated substantial return in the last year, it doesn't mean that they're good investment locations long term. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, and this is where, the old, paradox comes into play, where they say, well, you can't make your decisions on the basis of past behavior. Well, and this is what I always say, that's the only data point that you do have. But if I can't make decisions on behavior that has been lasting for 3 decades, why do you then make decisions on the basis of behavior that lasts 3 years? So if somebody is saying
it's this short-term memory.
If somebody's saying, it's a great investment location and it has really been pumping for the last 3 years, and it's telling me not to look at how it's been performing 25 years before that, that's being intellectually infantile, essentially, because you're saying that, yes, one time frame is okay to be analyzed and considered, while another time frame you should ignore.
Well, here's the thing. In marketing, you've got to have a certain amount of touch points for someone to buy from you, because they see you 15 times. I've seen many different versions of this, but there's 15 touch points, or the 15 times they see you come up online, you build enough brand trust for them to buy from you. When someone lately hears Perth, we've been buying in Perth, we've been doing well. We've been buying in Perth, we've been doing well. And they hear it from multiple people and they see it online. All of a sudden, they'll literally call me up and say, I'd like to buy in Perth. So they just literally go by what they're hearing now. 3 years ago, if I said to someone, and I know the particular client, we had a great conversation, and they said, no, I don't buy Perth. It's a mining town. It doesn't perform. That's the reason you need to now take a look. I mean, you can't build that $250,000 house again on a 700 square meter block in a 3-bedroom brick veneer for 250 grand, and construction costs just went up 50%, and all the data showing that it's on. Like your personal opinion is emotion based. It's not data-based, and that's where people are making the mistake. And they're very short-sighted, because they said that about Brisbane, about the floods, right? Anyone in 2020 or 2019 would have said, we don't buy Brisbane, it floods. I know someone who bought there and they made no money. That's great. Whenever someone makes money, someone loses money. It has nothing to do with the data and how the property is going to perform.
This is the beauty of trying to balance data and your personal desires. You know what I mean? Like, you have areas that are potentially perceived as really bad investment locations, and they've performed well over the last 20 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have areas that perceived as great investment locations for long term, but, have in the past, underperformed dramatically. You know what I mean? So you have to be, and this comes back to, you have to be really clear with what your brief. And this is what we, for example, at HTAG, at our mastermind community, as we try to teach everyone to understand what their client wants, and then being able, let's say you used an example, somebody comes to you and you says, I want to invest in Perth, or somebody says this area in Perth is a great investment location. The first thing that I ask is for who. So for who, under which investment time frame, and under which risk profile.
Yeah.
So buyers agents get this every day. They get everyday investors coming to them and saying, listen, please buy in this area for me. Now, to me, this is counterintuitive and a bit of an oxymoron, because I'm paying an expert to buy a property for me, and yet I'm telling that expert where to buy. I don't get that, but it's fine. The power of social media essentially is emerging. You know what I mean? But the thing is, though, it's always great to have the capacity to actually first understand the client's brief and be very clear on it, and then explain their proposal in relation to their brief and say, okay, Mr. Client, you want this, you want 15-year investment time horizons, but this is what we are looking at. And then be able to coherently explain it, and everyone resonates to competence. Everyone resonates to your ability to actually really construct an argument and a narrative.
Yep.
Nobody's going to say no to that. First, it reflects ethics, and then it inspires trust. You know what I mean? Now, people can say, people who don't know about what you're saying, you can spin anything you want. Well, your argument, to be well understood, needs to be explained in a way as if you're explaining it to a 9-year-old child.
Yeah.
It needs to be reduced, simplified, broken up. It needs to have clear links, and you need to be willing to accept the questions. And usually, the lower the level of understanding of your customer, the more questions you will get, but you need to be able to answer them. And that needs to be then, and everyone can understand if somebody is lying or not. Believe me, you get 5 questions about your narrative, and if you can't connect it back into a story, you'll lose them.
Yeah.
So coming back to, what you said, you need to understand the client's brief, but you need to understand the narrative about a particular suburb in relation to the brief, which means that in that instance, some economic drivers or some property investment indicators would carry completely different significance for two different individuals. And we're talking about the same area, which means that one area can be a phenomenal investment location for person A and an atrocious investment location for person B.
Yeah. So 100%, totally agree. I think everyone's strategy is different and the goals are different. I think most people don't even know their end goal. No one really comes to me and says, here's my end goal. I really want to achieve this by X amount of time frame. Nobody comes in like that. Yeah, that goes to show how
it's a hard one as well, though. You know what I mean? Like, because the needle is moving constantly. And when I say the needle is moving, you have your borrowing capacity is changing, the interest rates are changing. And again, you have to make certain assumptions to actually be able to deconstruct your goal, you know, which is what banks do when they evaluate your loans. I'm assuming, and the mortgage brokers out there could be now screaming their heads off, but you know, like they apply a 7% rate and assume that you're going to borrow, you know, to see if you can repay it. Bottom line is, I mean, and if they can't deconstruct the goal, then it becomes to, okay, buying the best possible asset as you can right now for yourself. You know what I mean? And
that's what it is.
And what is that? And then just layering as your borrowing capacity either improves or stays the same, and layering.
100%.
But the worst thing that you can do, the worst possible thing that you can do is just assume that because somebody else has said that this is a good investment location, that it's also good for you. You get it. You have to always ask questions of everything and try to analyze. And you know what? That's the only way you learn. This is not, okay, I'm mistrustful towards everyone in the world and I want to discount their opinion. It's about just trying to understand why things are. I'll tell you a story. It's funny, actually. There was a guy, and I won't name the company name. He had a successful buyer's agency. I think they're still around, but I think they're much less prominent, and was doing like these events, monthly events, where he invites, I guess, his leads into a certain, you know, venue, and then he would talk about certain things. Yeah. And then I remember I was married back then, and I had a meeting with my ex-wife, me, and him about, you know, our strategy and our buying and all of that. And I'm like, he's talking about things. He's doing the sales pitch, which I didn't know was the sales pitch back then. You know, like he was just chatting essentially. And as he's talking, I'm like, I understand. You know, you want to teach us how to do this so we can do it ourselves. This just shows the lack of knowledge of mine and where I actually was and what the system is. Yeah. But that was like, and you see, like, essentially, you know, like you see, you know, an elephant in the room appears, you know what I mean? Everyone goes, he goes quiet. He's like, he didn't say it, but he's like, no, I'm not teaching you to do that, you know? Yeah. But that was my assumption, you know, like, you're teaching me these few things, you're doing these events so I can learn and actually do it myself.
No. But he's funneling you.
It comes down to then I'm not saying buyer's agents are not required. Buyer's agents are essential, but you need to ask questions. It's going to save you a lot of money, especially for such an important and big financial decision.
100%.
You know?
And I think a buyer's agent, a good one, don't just use a buyer's agent. I think a good one is essential, is necessary so that you're not placed into those 95% of Australians who either own one or two properties. Your first and second purchase make or break you. That's where you take your portfolio. That's where you go towards 4, 5, 6, 10. Is making sure that those properties have really set you up and they've got to be the right properties in the right area. I think that's where the majority of Australians go wrong.
Yeah, see, I absolutely agree. Like, and I would say this would be a good rule of thumb. If you're engaging a buyer's agent and he can't sit there for 5 to 10 minutes to explain in detail why some investment is a good investment for you, he's not the professional for you. If it's like, because I said so and because my name is well known in the industry, well, nobody's going to say that, but essentially it could be a one-sentence answer. If it's not like a mini essay, and by the way, some people can't consume a mini essay, it will be too much information, but it will be too, you know, so you sort of speak to your audience essentially. But if you can't really explain your position in detail, it's not the right person for you. And that works with data, that works with asset selection, that works with anything. And now, a good buyer's agent and an ethical buyer's agent or an ethical data analysis person will try to anticipate the question, will try to understand the person's level of knowledge, and then he would anticipate what question that person should ask if they had more knowledge to help him out. So let's say a person can't reach to that level of understanding and actually ask a question that's necessary. If you're ethical and if you know what you're doing and if you're competent, you will go, you should be thinking about this. And let me explain that to you.
Yeah.
So you help them.
Yeah.
You sort of putting these questions into their mind that should be asking, and you're elaborating further upon it. You know what I mean? And this is how you educate your customers.
Yeah.
And this is how you retain your customer for the entire portfolio building journey.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't get the churn anymore.
Yeah.
You reduce that churn. Your acquisition time increases dramatically.
Yeah.
Like you close them within hours or minutes. You know what I mean? Again, you know, I want you to invest in this area for me. If you provide an elaborate answer why that area is bad for that person, and then you superimpose that with an area that's good for that person, you're closing them right there.
Yeah.
They're signing. Yeah. They're signing with you.
Yeah.
Sign me up kind of thing, you know? That's all you need.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, it's anticipating and I understand, you know, I'm an educator by nature. So I try to think how other person is thinking, and I'll try to answer the questions before they come up. And this is, again, that's why it's a good, I guess, a good connection of events that have happened in my life that have allowed me to develop that skill set. For example, when I was doing my PhD, I needed to go through a rigorous process of, and by the way, you know, your thesis is being corrected by the best in the field. You know, your thesis is being judged by the best in the world, you know. So you really need to have a good argument. So you need to anticipate what the marker will ask about a certain concept and notion that you've introduced to make your argument. So as you're building your argument, you're introducing concepts and notion to build your argument. But you need to also define those concepts and notion in order for that story to make sense. So you need to think in future what the person is going to ask, so you can actually answer it before they ask it. And that same day, I'm assuming that comes with you. You know, let's say, you know, you're trying to buy a house that, you know, and this, I'm out of my depth here, so I'm just sort of winging it. But let's say you're choosing an asset and it looks in a particular way, or it's located in a particular street, or it's facing certain way. And then, you know, a person looks at it and goes, you know, as I always say, you don't invest in areas that you want to live in. You know what I mean? And this is why reinvesting came about as a notion after that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you anticipate right away that a person might, you know, believe that the look of the house doesn't coincide with the fact that they like Chanel bags. And then you have to, you know, explain that it's not the look of the house, it's the financial outcome of that investment that actually matters the most, as opposed to the look. Now, again, you can explain that and the person can say, well, it matters to me because I don't have the time to input and to do X, Y, Z to turn it into, you know, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
But you anticipate those questions and you try to answer it. And I think that's what a good service is, essentially.
100%. I think another one of the key ones when looking at selecting your buyer's agent is, have they achieved the things you want to achieve themselves? The worst thing you could do is go to a buyer's agent who hasn't built their own portfolio, hasn't achieved that success, doesn't know what it looks like, can't look back and reflect and say, like, I look back on the 14 properties in 12 months and go, man, that could have been 20 if I did it a different way. You know, like, you need to show something, like, and that was my entry into buyer's agency back in the day. It was like, hey, here's my proof. Here's what I know how to do and I can help you do it. Whereas I think today there's a lot of buyer's agents out there. You just need to be super careful with who you select when it comes to when it's an investment buyer's agent, just making sure that they understand and that they've done it for themselves.
Yeah, see, I agree. So that's the first level, I would say. So the first level is you need to understand that the person has been there before. I mean, this is my whole, like, I'm not going to use an inappropriate word now, but the whole issue that I have. Do it. The whole issue that I have with the what's the influencer space?
Yeah.
Everyone's an influencer.
Oh, yeah.
And my PhD was in anxiety, for example, and everyone talks about how to manage anxiety. How there's so many influencers and coaches. Yeah. We've never been more anxious, mate. You know what I mean? Like, what's happening? Yeah. So something is not making sense. So you need to understand that the person has done it and been there. Absolutely. Now, you need to go a step further and consider, like, this is what I always say. So if you look at a single mother who's earning 50K a year and has managed to raise 2 children and has 2 properties in the portfolio, and an individual who's earning 300K, has a property in his portfolio and has no dependents, that person B who's got 8 properties is not a more competent person.
No.
So you got to nuance it further. It's not just, okay, yes, I've been there and I've done it. It's also taking into account, and it's hard to actually ascertain that. You know what I mean? But again, it comes back down to the level of explanation and interaction right there between two individuals where you can ascertain competence.
Yeah.
I think it's also a mistake to completely assign value to an individual by the number of properties they have in their portfolio.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I think, but it's also very important to look at that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%.
But then you need to look at it, as I said, you know,
the strategy behind it,
single mother who's, you know, is barely scraping her way through trying to feed the kids and has managed to acquire 2 properties. Like, she's a gun.
100%.
She's a gun.
100%.
You can have 15 properties. You don't know what you're talking about, mate.
Yeah.
Because she can first, you know, manage that shopping list, by the way, and push those $50 longer.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing, you know. So these are all the things you need to, 100%. And again, it comes back down to market. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just because, again, ask questions.
Well, marketing is a big thing these days, right? You could be. I think there's marketers and then there's buyers agents. There's a difference. There's a slight difference. But the way in which
a good way to know whether that's true or not, if they're not allowing you to comment on their posts.
And that's a good one. I've seen that happen a fair bit.
And deleting your comments.
Yeah.
And they don't like to get. By the way, I'm very passionate, as you can see. I'm intense. I'm passionate. You know, I try to answer every comment. Never in my life have I deleted a comment on any of my pages. On any of my social media accounts. Now, when somebody asks me a question, I provide a very detailed response as much as I can, so people might seem that I'm in defense mode. No, this is just me. I'm intense.
I know, because I fucking call you.
Yeah.
I call you don't answer my call, and all of a sudden I see a response to something come up.
Yeah.
So you're working at that comment like straight away, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the intensity shouldn't be confused or conflated with being sensitive about it. No, it's just me. That's how I approach things.
Yeah.
But if you're deleting comments, if you're deleting comments about, you know, oversupplies in certain areas, happened to me recently.
Yeah.
You know, or, you know, don't buy here because of that. And then somebody questions and you delete the comments.
Yeah.
Like,
they don't have a response. But those individuals that do that, they don't have the response. That's why. What do you think it's deleted? Because whatever reason. I mean, they're deleting it because they know that they don't have a response to it. And they don't. Look, so much content is put out there today. And here's what a lot of people don't realize in property. There's a lot of content being put out there with people that don't know. I've been on YouTube lately, Matija. There's people on there talking about Melbourne. There's one guy, he's on YouTube. He says, Melbourne, take a punt on it if you want, but it's not performing. Take a punt. Like literally not like he flashed up a bunch of data from CoreLogic. This guy's got no idea what he's doing.
You know why that happens? So first, that's a good example, like the CoreLogic thing. You know, some people talk about supply. See, first you need to understand economics, and you don't need to get a PhD in economics. You just need to understand that reducing supply and an increasing demand equals price growth. However, what does that say? That there are 2 domains of price growth. So if somebody's talking supply and they're not mentioning demand, should I infer right away that demand is not absorbing the excess supply?
Yeah.
Like, this is the thing. It's like, if you're talking only supply and if you're single dimensional, that, no problem.
Yeah.
But you're not speaking about demand. Also, the problem of aggregating, you know, and trying to paint every little subset of a data set with the same brush. For example, you know, Victoria as a state, and then every suburb is Victoria has the same problems or would have the same dynamics. That's why people always say there are markets within markets. But coming back to content, the issue is that people repurpose everyone's content. You know, you say a few things and you get clicks. By the way, fear sells. So if I'm going to talk bad about Melbourne, people are going to look at, because they either might be invested in it or they're about to pull the trigger. They don't want to make a mistake. So it's an emotional tug. It's an emotional driver. I'm going to look at it. You know, people see responses to that. I'm going to make the same thing. You know, the thing about interest rates. How many posts do you see from people about interest rates when, you know, RBS sits down to make a decision?
Man, you know, I don't pay attention to that. I don't even look at interest rates.
You see about 100 posts about the same decision.
Same thing.
From the same cash rate widget. Okay, listen, it's fine. It's very important to understand that in the context of property. But I guess, you know, innovation and creating your own brand and all of that. So, and also, everyone is on their separate journey. Yes. And that comes down to also creating your own brand. I'm not saying that people are stupid for posting, you know, seeing 30 other people post about the cash rate and they're doing the same. Yeah. I'm not saying that. Yeah. They're on their journey of creating their own brand, their own voice online and all of that. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's wrong. All I'm saying is that the fee sells essentially when somebody talks about Melbourne and paints it with the same brush and then everyone repurposes the same content. The deletion part, you know, deleting content comes down to either I can't be bothered to actually go into an explanation with this individual because I know he's going to look at my answers closely.
Yeah.
It could be that.
Yeah.
Or I'm lying. It's one of those two things. It could be a third one, which doesn't have to be the reflection of the first two.
Yeah.
It could be, I don't want any negativity in my feed. Any form of questioning in my feed. I want to maintain a certain type of perception.
But it's interesting. The certain people that delete those comments actually talk about, they discuss the exact things and position themselves as, experts in that field where they're superior. But then when they're questioned in regards to their commentary and the fact that their post is completely wrong and it doesn't represent what's accurate right now at this time, they delete it.
See, we have to understand how people's psychology functions. Okay. So some people have cult-like followings. Okay. And there are two levels here. So there's this individual who has a cult-like following, and then there's the cult. Cult is a bad word. Let's say a lot of people like them. You know what I mean? So the people that like them, the issue with showing that the person that they're liking is wrong is not in the objective fact of being wrong. It is because that person made a conscious choice of liking them. So what you're doing by showing that they're wrong is you're also telling them that they make a wrong decision.
That individual's feeling attacked.
Yeah, correct. It's about their personal choice of choosing to side with a particular side. And when you're showing that side is wrong, you're inadvertently telling them that they're wrong, so they're taking it personally.
But is this not similar to COVID in some way?
Well,
it's a similar sort of,
well, it's still going.
Yeah.
It's still going. It's in relation to everything, mate. It's in relation to everything online. It's in relation to politics. It's in relation to COVID.
No one likes what they like challenged.
No. It's in relation to everything. Like it is, and by the way, it happens to us. It happens to me. If I say that this water, nature's best, this is the best water I've ever tried. And then you come with, by the way, it's a reflection of maturity to be able to hold two competing thoughts in your mind or to even be flexible enough to have the growth mindset. Remember what I say in our group. So, and you come to me and you say, well, no, this water is better and this is the proof. You need to understand the emotional response that you have inside because you've made the decision that this is the best. And if somebody comes with something different, it reflects on your inability to actually see the truth.
Yes. Yeah.
Reflects on your inability to see the truth. And if you can't see the truth, and this is the corrosive effect.
But also, if I drop six grand on this water, that's also going to affect it.
Well.
Right?
Again, absolutely. It comes, and exactly. And it comes down to maturity. I mean, cult-like followings, let's say if you have a cult-like following or any form of cult or any form of following that doesn't question anything, which would inadvertently be, referred to as a cult, is a following that is not flexible enough to question their own decisions and to actually observe themselves from the side, But it is a sign of maturity to make mistakes and to then develop as the time goes by and to change and to shift and to X, Y, and Z. Now, in business, you can leverage, huge followings to make a lot of money. That is fine. But the only thing that, you're not banking on is the time factor. Time heals all wounds, but in the same way, time also highlights everything. You can't really escape. I think the best thing in everything, and even in, let's say I'm a co-founder of a platform, let's not talk about the platform. Is there anything out there that's perfect? No. Can I improve my product? Absolutely. Some of our features, and I would say 3 or 4 of our features came from feedback from our members. And I always encourage people to question me and to I hate heckling. Just for the sake of heckling. I want to say that you're wrong just because things like you know what I mean? Yeah. But if you're going to explain to me a way that something can be looked in a better way, absolutely, let's integrate it. Let's make it better. Let's make it better.
Yeah, you have. Because I've mentioned something before and you were quick to adapt it. So it shows that there's no ego at play. We all want to be better.
Man, it's like Carl Jung, I read psychology and he said, you need to develop your ego and build it, strong and hard up until you're 30. And then your job after 30 is to work really hard on dismantling it. It's your ego gets to a certain point where you fight you fight your way through society and find your place under the sun. That's very important for every individual. to preserve that level of individuality. And the ego helps you there.
Yeah.
But then once you reach a certain point, if you really want to attain wisdom or the growth mindset, or if you want to really learn and expand past the horizons of your community, you need to really work on dismantling it completely.
Yeah.
Completely. So, I mean, that's the game we're in. That's the game that's being played. But, you know, good luck to them. Everyone has a different approach. Some have a short-term mindset. Some have a long-term mindset. Some have short-term games. Some have long-term games. It's the same with property.
Yeah.
Same with choosing an area.
100%, mate. 100%. I wanted to talk about, in this episode, I wanted to discuss property hotspot or property not spots, right? So let's do one of each. Okay. So looking at the hashtag analytics data set, what's today's not spot that many may be bullish on in today's market, but you feel that there are obviously way better markets to invest in, and perhaps that market has missed its peak? What would that market be?
Well, okay, so let's now go all the way back of what we talked about. So we talked about the fact that one area can be a great investment location for one person and a bad investment location for another. So inadvertently, if we're talking about hotspots and not spots, we are sort of going against what we've said, because we're saying that, you know, this is a hotspot for everyone, this is a not spot for everyone. Yeah. Which is why I'd rather like to start and inverse it. I would rather like to start with areas that are good investment locations. But good investment locations, and why I'd like to start there is that's how the platform has been built. In order for you to come to a particular location, whether it's good or not, you need to build it in a way. You need to construct an algorithm, which is a collection of filters and the associated values, metrics, that meet your brief, that meet what you want to achieve and your goals. So it's very individual specific. And that starts with the budget itself. You know what I mean?
So what sort of budget do you want to work with?
So let's say if we work with, I don't know, between price point, we can work between, and I'm sharing a screen. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Give me a second. Let's go.
You see the screen?
Yes, sir.
So let's do between 500 and 650.
Yeah.
So you're inadvertently there. So how many entries? So we have, you know, there's 9,000 total entries. You know, we have 587. Right away, we just narrow the funnel, the database. Yeah. So we're just working with our own budget. But now you have to like layer the filters and understand what you're trying to achieve. And this is what I always ask people. And this is what, as you know, we train in our mastermind group is you need to understand the client's brief. And now the client's brief can be extremely complex notion. Yeah. But you have to reduce it to a couple of elements that are sort of, so you have to reduce that complex notion to a couple of points that you need to answer, that you need answered. So first one is the budget which we've addressed. The second one is what is your investment time horizon? Yep. Okay. The third one is, do you want a hot spot and a warm spot? And I'll explain what that means. It's important. And the fourth one is, what is your risk profile? Yeah. Now, your budget drives what you can get. You can't expect, you know, this is what I always say, you can't have your cake and eat it too, which means that you can't be investing in an area that is 350K in typical value and expect it to grow 15% annually compounded for the next 10 years. So again, it's common sense. There's a reason why that particular suburb or that particular area has been restricted in its growth, and it's sitting at 750K while we have the double bays of the world that are, you know, 2.5 mil typical value. Whatever. I'm just throwing figures out there. So society is segregated, which is unfortunate, but that's the fact. You know what I mean? So your budget inadvertently, you know, reduces the amount of possibilities that you can have. Yeah. The next thing is the investment time horizon. Yeah. Do you want to be in it for 3 years? Do you want to be in it between 3 to 5? Do you want to be in it between 5 to 10? Or do you want to be in it between 10 to 20? So you got short term, mid term, long term. Yep. So what are your investment time horizon? And understanding that will affect how you layer the metrics and how you assign value or weighting to a particular metrics in your analysis. Yep. Then we had the hotspot and the warm spot. And sorry, I got to explain everything so people understand how you actually need to approach it, and then it just coincides with what we said before regarding that every area is not the same for every individual. So now the hotspot and the warm spot. I mean, as you know, we didn't coin the term warm spot. It existed in the ether, you know, but essentially when it comes to investment, hashtag first started with this warm spot methodology. And it started first because of hotspotting. because I was annoyed with the fact that, not with the hotspotting as a business, but with that terminology that, it's a hotspot for everyone. You know what I mean? And then warm spot try to address, essentially a movement of demand, like when an area, before it becomes a hotspot, where demand actually moves, So I try to force people to think about, that first a hotspot doesn't remain a hotspot on a long time. Demand shifts and moves, and then how do you predict the shifts or movement in demand? But the most important thing with the term hotspot and warm spot is, when do you want your returns? If you're investing in a hotspot, you're going to have 10% plus returns right away when you invest. Now you have to understand what are the hallmarks of a hotspot and see how you're explaining. Imagine you're my client now and I'm explaining this to you, So what are the hallmarks of a hotspot? The hallmarks of a hotspot, you'll be generating 10 to 15% annual growth for a certain amount of time. Hotspots usually last between, 2 to 4 years on average. Nothing is permanent. So you'll be generating that amount of money. But the issue with a hotspot is, you're going to struggle to find a piece of real estate that you can buy. Again, remember how we discussed volumes and buyers agents coming in, snapping up everything. You're going to struggle to find real estate. But also, because it's a hotspot, you're going to be overpaying for that real estate.
And you won't get the asset selection that you want. You'll get stuck buying something that whatever you get off the shelf, because, you're lucky to just get in.
Exactly. And see, let's say you carry the market momentum. Let's say the market momentum is what gives you growth, and you make 10 to 15% in the first year. But hold on, the question is, have you actually made that percentage because you overpaid for it?
Did you overpay?
You overpaid for it. The whole notion of a hotspot must assume an overpaying process that lasts for a couple of years. You know what I mean? As in prices rise. Well, when I say overpaying, there needs to be more demand than supply. That doesn't mean... overpaying does not equate to, less demand, more supply, because that's how growth happens. But you know how things happen on the ground.
Oh, it happens.
Sales agents want to sell the asset to the highest bidder, essentially. You know what I mean?
And it happens super quick, because I remember, end of 2020 in Logan, property prices, a $280,000 property, all of a sudden sold for $320,000. So it happens that quick.
Exactly.
That 20, 30 grand, 40 grand more happens in an instant. So what you're doing then, you're paying, 20, 30, 40 grand more instantly, but you're also then in competition all of a sudden with 10 or 15 other buyers. And that happened overnight, and that was COVID.
But then the next thing also is that I always say is, how do you know when you've actually entered a hotspot and how much time you got left? So let's say if we said that a hotspot lasts between 2 to 4 years, when did you actually enter a hotspot and how much time you have left to leverage that market momentum? Why not come before it so you can actually get the entire momentum through? But anyway, if it's a hotspot and a warm spot, again, it comes back to the time frame. If somebody wants 3 years to be invested in an area, they want a hotspot. So it comes back to the time frame of returns. If somebody, again, borrowing capacity, if somebody has the borrowing capacity potentially to leverage into additional purchases in the next 2.5 years, well, then it's a warm spot. And this is why I asked the question. Then you buy in an area that doesn't have a compounding demand from internal residents and external investors. You can actually negotiate the price down, but the area has to have indicators that will ensure that it will turn into a hotspot. But in those 2 years, until you have your borrowing capacity, you're sitting on the sidelines making anywhere between 0 to 5%, and then it starts kicking into a hotspot. So the question is whether you want a hotspot or a warm spot. It essentially, when is your serviceability to purchase a new investment property, and when do you want the returns to actually happen, and how long are you in the market, which sort of coincides with point 2 that I've asked anyway. And then the risk profile. And this is the one that it's not mentioned at all. Sorry, let me rephrase that. This is the one that's rarely mentioned. A risk profile must be considered, and you have various forms of risk. You have risk from industry centralization. For example, on our platform, we have, industry centralization, dominance of mining and agriculture, negative environmental effects such as bushfires and flooding. Why are they risk? Well, essentially, if you're exposed to flooding, your cost of holding the asset increases, which means your returns diminish. If you're in a centralized industry, for example, if the macroeconomic conditions change to adversely impact that centralized industry, that business starts letting people go. It impacts on the purchasing power of its residents. It adversely impacts property growth, etc., etc. Now, these are the risk factors that you must consider. But addressing risk doesn't actually imply that, you will see growth.
Yep.
I always say you insure your car, but you don't hope you're going to have a car accident every time you drive it out of the driveway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you still insure it. So this is why risk. And if your time frame is long term, you need to address risk.
Yeah.
So I had to do this rant, and I always do this rant because you have to contextualize things to avoid being, but you said this, but you said that. So, okay, this is the price point. The next thing that we do that I consider on the platform always is, again, risk. Risk is the first factor, one of the first factors that I consider, and confidence here plays a key role. If you're analyzing data sets on the back, can you see the screen, Michael?
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're analyzing data sets, if you're analyzing areas from a statistical point of view, you need to have high accuracy in the data that you're looking at, which is what we term on our platform. If I expand it to expert, you'll get all of the metrics that we have. There's heaps, but if you come across all the way, you will see data confidence, see high, okay? And data confidence is essentially related to the volume of sales. And I'll just quickly explain this. So usually areas that have high confidence data, you don't see changes in their metrics oscillating from month to month in a dramatic way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And because you're making a decision on the basis of data, it's very important for you to know that today's days on market sitting at 35 days, it's not going to jump to 180 tomorrow, which will insert an additional layer of uncertainty in the decision making that you don't actually need. So now, property investing is a game of probability. You're trying to increase the probability of a particular outcome. It's not a game of certainty. It's a game of probability. So if I'm an investor, I'm increasing the probability of finding the right area if I address the data accuracy because I know that the metrics that I'm looking at will not have these sporadic changes for which I can't account. And the further we go into the future, again, coming back to time frame, the further we go back into the future, just by the nature of additional time, we're adding additional levels of uncertainty. So we inadvertently want to minimize it in our research. Makes sense? So data confidence is one of the first things that I consider. The next thing is the risk score. You already know, but for the audience, our risk score is, an amalgam of 80 metrics, each with different weightings or values assigned to it. But if you really want to reduce it to the 4 key factors, it will be, as I said, industry centralization, dominance of mining and agriculture, and negative environmental effects, which would be bushfire, flooding, and erosion. Now, there are other metrics that could be packaged as risk. I'll give an example. Renter-to-owner ratio could be an element of risk, which could adversely impact price growth. Why? Let's say macroeconomic conditions change. You have a population that has a higher rental population. Macroeconomic conditions change, i.e. interest rates increase dramatically. It becomes very hard to for investors to hold on to those assets. It was happening recently. It was happening as close as a year or 2 years ago. And what they start doing is they start selling off because they can't hold it anymore, because their mortgage repayments are increasing at a rate that's faster than the increase in rents. So they actually can't cover the shortfall. They start selling off. So that high renter-to-owner ratio inadvertently then turns into supply, additional supply that can dampen price growth. Now, you have to assign weightings to industry centralization or renter-to-owner ratio. And the weightings are assigned in terms of the primary, secondary, or tertiary nature when it comes to impacting price growth. So industry centralization would carry a higher weighting of risk than would be a higher renter-to-owner ratio. You know what I mean? So that's why it's assigned higher weighting. So if I had to encapsulate our risk score, those 4 domains, industry centralization, agriculture, and negative environmental effects, they carry the higher weightings. So I always, when I search the data set, I buy an insurance policy. I say the risk score needs to be greater than or equal to 50. Why 50? Because RCS score is a relative score. You compare all areas to each other. So when I'm setting it greater to 50, and by the way, what you can see, these are the RCS scores, and you can see the bar. The higher the bar, the less risk there is. So by me setting it at 50, I'm eliminating all of those areas that are above average in inherent risk. I'm casting a wider net. Now, what do we say? Hotspots, not spots, or, which areas are good investment locations, which areas are not. Now, this is the primary aspect. So we got price, we got confidence, we got risk. What is the next thing that usually should be considered? Well, this one is sort of evident, but it's not also completely evident, and I haven't seen people really explain it properly, and that's affordability. So affordability is one of the crucial metrics that's going to play a dominant role in the next 5 to 10 years. Why? Because of the erosion of purchasing power from that is happening now. And erosion of purchasing power happens through many different avenues. It's not just the increases in the CPI and the interest rates, but it's also devaluing of currency. So when you print more money, the value of that currency, it's worth less essentially, and that's what's been happening mainly in the US, but it's also happening in Australia through COVID. We printed, I don't know how much money we printed. So essentially you can actually buy less. Remember the shopping trolley analogy that you always said. And because property prices have actually increased dramatically, they haven't actually kept pace with the increases in wages. So the affordability gap is even bigger now. Which is why, and you tell me if I'm wrong, what are most of your briefs these days? Well, what's the price point?
Everyone's 400 or sometimes I hear 300 to 700.
That's it.
Honestly, you shouldn't be investing more than that anyway.
I get it. No, absolutely. There are different factors at play, but that inadvertently shows that people want to get onto the property ladder. They want to get onto the property ladder, but they can't afford the 850s. Now, affordability is an important thing because of two factors. This is how we ensure that a warm spot turns into a hot spot. So first, we need property that is affordable for its residents. Internal residents, people that live within the suburb. What usually happens then is if people can afford property, they buy property, the growth causes a positive feedback loop, which invites more purchases, and then the investor demand comes to the market, the external demand. So you first need to have affordable property for its own residents for it to become an investor hotspot as well. Because you're not going to see, you will see in some instances, which is why some areas that are shilled online are complete nonsense. But you'll see areas that are appealing to investors and yet very non-appealing to internal residents. You're inadvertently eliminating a huge cohort of demand. And by the way, most of the mortgages that are signed these days, 50%, 100% more, I think, is for owner-occupiers.
That's a wrap for part one of today's episode. A big thank you to Dr. Matt for sharing his expertise. Stay tuned for part two, where we discuss affordability, demand and supply metrics, and how to pick the next hotspot. If you like today's episode, obviously jump on, like and subscribe, and we will catch you next time on Property Banter.